The drilling machine stopped working again. Lisa Morrison kicked the metal base and cursed under her breath. 3 months on the moon, and the equipment broke down every other day. She checked her tablet's readings one more time. The ground penetrating. Radar showed something strange 200 meters below the surface. "Jack, you need to see this," she called through her helmet radio. Commander Jack Sullivan bounced over in the low gravity, his boots kicking up silver dust that fell slowly back to the surface. He looked at her screen and frowned. "Equipment? Malfunction? That's what I thought at first." Lisa adjusted the settings and ran the scan again. The same image appeared. "But I've checked it 5 times. There's something down there. Something big." The structure on the screen didn't look natural. The edges were too straight, the corners too perfect. Nature didn't make things like that. Jack studied the image for a long moment, then called the rest of the team. Within an hour, Paul Rodriguez had set up additional scanning equipment around the site. The engineer moved with careful precision, double-checking every connection. Amy Chen, their expert on alien archaeology, even though they'd never found any aliens, watched the data stream across multiple screens. "This can't be right," Paul said. He ran his hand through his hair, a nervous habit that didn't work well in a spacesuit. "The material density readings are off the charts. Whatever's down there, it's not moon rock. Could be a meteor," Jack suggested, though his voice lacked conviction. Amy shook her head. "Not with those shapes. Look at these angles." She traced her finger along the screen. "These are manufactured, built by someone or something." The decision to dig came from Earth 12 hours later. Every government official, scientist, and military advisor had weighed in. The answer was unanimous. They had to know what lay beneath the lunar surface. The excavation took 3 weeks. They worked in shifts, carefully removing layer after layer of moon dust and rock. As they dug deeper, strange things started happening. Electronic devices glitched when pointed toward the hole. Some team members reported headaches that came and went without pattern. Steve Harrison swore he could hear music sometimes, though no one else did. When they finally reached it, nobody spoke for 5 minutes. The object was enormous, stretching nearly half a kilometer in length. Its surface was smooth like glass, but dark like the space between stars. It absorbed their lights, giving back nothing. Paul tried every scanning technique he knew: X-rays, infrared, ultrasound, magnetic resonance. Nothing penetrated the hull. "It's a ship," Amy whispered. She didn't know how she knew, but she was certain. "It's been here a very long time." "How long?" Jack asked. "Longer than human civilization. Maybe longer than humans." They set up a permanent camp around the excavation site. Every day, teams went down to study the object. They took thousands of measurements, photographs, and samples. Except they couldn't actually take samples. No tool. They could scratch the surface. Diamond-tipped drills that could cut through anything broke against it. Laser cutters did nothing. Even controlled explosives in a desperate test authorized by Earth left no mark. Paul noticed the vibrations first. When he placed his gloved hand on the hull, he felt something. Not through his suit's tactile feedback system, but deeper. In his bones. The ship was humming at a frequency that shouldn't be able to pass through the vacuum around them. "It's active," he announced during the evening briefing. "Whatever this thing is, it's not dead. There's power running through it." Lisa had been mapping the ship's dimensions and found they didn't make sense. "The measurements keep changing," she explained. "Not by much, just a few centimeters here and there. But it's like the ship isn't quite solid, like it exists partially somewhere else." Daniel Brooks, one of the younger crew members, volunteered to spend a full day shift alone with the ship. He said he wanted to observe it without distractions. When his shift ended, he came back pale and shaking. "It knows we're here," he said. "I don't know how to explain it, but the ship is aware of us. It's been scanning us the same way we've been scanning it." Jack wanted to dismiss this as stress and isolation, but too many strange things had happened. Equipment failures that followed patterns. The way certain harmonics from the hull matched human brainwave frequencies. The dreams they'd all been having but hadn't talked about until Amy brought it up. "I see stars I don't recognize," Amy said. Galaxies that aren't in any catalog, and something watching. Not hostile, just curious, like we're being evaluated. Karen Webb, the mission psychologist, had been documenting everyone's responses to the discovery. We're all experiencing something, she confirmed. The proximity to the ship is affecting our perception, but I don't think it's harmful. If anything, it seems to be trying to communicate. On day 23 of the excavation study, everything changed. Lisa was taking routine measurements when her hand passed through the solid hull as if it wasn't there. She jerked back, her heart racing. When she tried again, her hand hit solid metal. "Did anyone else see that?" she gasped. Paul had been watching. He approached slowly and reached out. His hand stopped at the hull. Then Amy tried. Solid. Jack, Steve, Daniel, all of them met resistance. But when Lisa tried again, her hand went through. "It's choosing," Amy said with sudden understanding. "The ship is deciding who to let in." They tried everything to reproduce the effect. Different people at different times, various equipment configurations, even having Lisa try while thinking different thoughts. Nothing worked consistently. Sometimes she could phase through, sometimes she couldn't. There was no pattern they could detect. Earth Command was in uproar. First contact protocols, which everyone had thought were just theoretical exercises, were suddenly very real. The discovery had leaked despite security measures. The whole world knew humanity had found proof of alien intelligence, but the team on the moon had more immediate concerns. The ship's vibrations were getting stronger. The strange effects were intensifying, and Lisa had started having visions when she touched the hull. Not dreams or hallucinations, but information downloads. Technical specifications in languages that didn't exist. Mathematical proofs for theorems humans hadn't discovered. Star maps showing the galaxy as it was billions of years ago. "It's teaching us," she told the others, "or preparing us for something." Late one night, lunar time, they all felt it. A pulse that passed through the camp, through their suits, through their bodies. When they rushed to the excavation site, they found the ship had changed. Where before it had been dark and light-absorbing, now it glowed with a soft blue radiance. And there was an opening. Not a door exactly, but a place where the solid hull had become permeable. It was an invitation. Jack looked at his team. They'd come to the moon to study rocks and set up communication relays. Instead, they'd found evidence that humanity wasn't alone in the universe, and now that evidence was inviting them inside. "We go in tomorrow," he decided. "Full team, full documentation. Whatever built this thing traveled between stars. They had technology we can't even understand. And they left this here for someone to find." As they prepared for sleep that night, each of them wondered the same thing. Why had the ship waited so long? And why had it chosen them to finally open its doors? The answer, they suspected, waited inside those impossible walls. The ship hummed in the vacuum, patient as it had been for eons, ready to share its secrets with these young creatures who had finally found the courage to dig deep enough to discover it. Daniel Brooks stood at the entrance to the alien ship, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his helmet. The opening shimmered like water but felt like nothing at all. He'd volunteered to go first because someone had to, and he'd rather it be him than anyone else on the team. "Daniel, you don't have to do this," Jack said through the radio. "We can send a drone first." "We tried that yesterday," Daniel reminded him. "The drones just bounce off. It only lets people through." He took a deep breath. "I'm going in." He stepped forward. The sensation was like walking through cool mist on a summer morning, except the mist was solid until it wasn't. One moment he was outside in the harsh lunar environment. The next he stood in a corridor that shouldn't exist. "Daniel, report." Jack's voice crackled in his ear. "I'm inside, and you're not going to believe this." Daniel turned slowly, trying to take in everything at once. "The corridor goes up and down at the same time. I can see the ceiling below me, and the floor above me, but I'm standing normally. It's like gravity flows in streams here." One by one, the others followed. Lisa came through next, then Amy, Paul, Jack, and finally Karen Webb. Each of them stopped and stared, their brains struggling to process what they were seeing. The walls curved in ways that hurt to look at directly. They seemed to be made of a material that was simultaneously transparent and opaque, solid and flowing. Colors flickered across the surfaces that didn't exist in any spectrum they knew. Paul pulled out his instruments, but they gave readings that made no sense. Temperature is reading as both absolute 0 and 5,000 degrees, he said, confused. Radiation levels are off the charts and completely normal. Every measurement is contradicting itself. Amy touched one of the walls carefully. Her gloved hand passed through it slightly, then met resistance. It's like the ship exists in multiple dimensions at once, and we're only seeing part of it. Our brains are trying to make sense of something they weren't designed to understand. They moved deeper into the ship, leaving markers to find their way back. The corridors branched and merged in impossible ways. They walked through a doorway and found themselves in a room that was bigger than the entire ship should be. They climbed stairs that led down while taking them up. Karen monitored everyone's vital signs and psychological responses. "We're all experiencing cognitive dissonance," she reported. "Our brains are literally rewriting themselves to process this environment. Be careful, push too hard and we might not be able to function normally anymore." In what seemed to be the center of the ship, though direction had lost meaning, they found a vast chamber filled with floating displays. The displays activated as they approached, showing images that moved through time as well as space. They watched stars being born and dying in seconds. They saw civilizations rise from primitive cells to spacefaring societies and then vanish like smoke. "This is a historical record," Amy breathed. "The ship has been recording everything it's encountered for millions of years? Billions?" Paul discovered he could interact with the displays by thinking mathematical equations. When he visualized complex formulas, the displays responded, showing technical diagrams and schematics. But the technology was so advanced it might as well have been magic. "They use folded space for energy storage," he said, his voice filled with awe. "They travel by moving the universe around them instead of moving through it. Their computational systems exist partially outside normal time, so they can process infinite calculations instantly." Lisa found geological surveys of Earth from before life existed. The ship had been watching their planet for longer than they could comprehend. It had recorded the first organic molecules, the rise of dinosaurs, the evolution of humans. They were looking at their own history from an alien perspective. Daniel had wandered to a different section of the room where smaller displays showed individual scenes. He gasped when he recognized one. "That's us. That's our landing on the moon 3 months ago. It's been watching us specifically since we arrived." They found other rooms, each one stranger than the last. A navigation center where star maps existed in 17 dimensions. An engineering section where machines operated on principles that violated every law of physics. A chamber that seemed to be dedicated to art, containing sculptures that changed based on who was looking at them, and music that could be seen but not heard. Steve Harrison made the mistake of trying to fully understand one of the engineering consoles. He stared at it for 10 minutes, his brain trying to process how a machine could exist in multiple timelines simultaneously. When the others found him, he was laughing and crying at the same time. "I can see it all," he said. "Past, present, future. We've already succeeded and failed. We're here and not here. The ship is ancient and newly built. Everything is true at once." Karen had to sedate him and guide him back to the entrance. It took 3 hours for his mind to reassemble itself into something resembling normal human cognition. After that, Jack set strict limits on how long anyone could focus on any single aspect of the ship. They found what Amy decided to call the library, though it was nothing like any library on Earth. Information existed as living geometry, stories told through shifting patterns of light and shadow. When Amy touched one of the information structures, knowledge flowed directly into her mind. "The builders," she gasped. "They were called the architects. They evolved past physical form millions of years ago. But before they transcended, they built these ships, hundreds of them scattered across the galaxy." "Why?" Jack asked. "As tests, or gifts, or both. Amy struggled to translate concepts that had no human equivalent. They wanted to find other species who could follow their path, who could evolve beyond the limitations of matter and energy. Paul had been examining what looked like a power source, though it bore no resemblance to anything humans had conceived. "This is impossible," he said. "The ship is powered by paradox. It generates energy from the friction between states of being that can't coexist. It literally runs on impossibility." They found records of other species who had discovered similar ships. The displays showed dozens of different alien races, each unique and strange. Some were gaseous beings from Jupiter-like worlds. Others were crystal structures that thought with light. There were creatures of pure energy, and ones that existed partially in parallel dimensions. But they all had one thing in common. They had all failed the test. They tried to understand completely, Lisa observed, studying the records. Each species pushed themselves to comprehend the technology fully, and it destroyed them. Their minds couldn't handle the contradictions. They went insane, or their civilizations collapsed, or they simply disappeared. "So it's a trap?" Daniel asked, having recovered enough to rejoin them. "No," Karen said slowly. "It's a filter. The architects are looking for a species that can handle transcendence, that can exist in multiple states without losing their identity. But every species so far has failed because they couldn't accept paradox. They spent hours in the ship, each discovery raising more questions than answers. The ship's computer system, if it could be called that, seemed to be alive in some sense. It responded to their thoughts and emotions, showing them what they were ready to see but no more. As they prepared to leave for the day, exhausted and overwhelmed, they found one more room. This one was different. It felt more real, more solid than the others. In the center was a simple pedestal with what looked like a book made of light. Amy approached it carefully. When she touched it, words appeared in the air, written in English but conveying meaning beyond language. "The test begins," she read. "You have seen what was and what might be. You have witnessed the fate of those who came before. Now you must choose. Transcend your limitations and join us in infinity, or remain bound by flesh and thought. But know this, the choice, once made, cannot be unmade." They looked at each other, understanding the weight of what they'd discovered. The ship wasn't just a relic or a curiosity. It was an invitation to become something more than human. But it was also a warning. Every species that had tried before had failed. As they made their way back through the impossible corridors, their minds struggling to hold on to what they'd learned, each of them wondered if humanity would be different, or if they would join the long list of civilizations that had reached for godhood and found only oblivion. The ship hummed around them, patient and eternal, waiting for their answer. Lisa Morrison woke up knowing things she had never learned. The molecular structure of elements that didn't exist on Earth, mathematical equations that describe the shape of time, the true distance between thoughts. She sat up in her bunk at the lunar base and realized she could see probability clouds around every object, showing all the things they might become. It had been 2 weeks since they'd first entered the ship, and it was changing them. "Anyone else having the dreams?" Paul asked at breakfast. His hands shook as he held his coffee pouch. "I solved 3 engineering problems last night that I've been working on for years. Except I didn't solve them. The solutions just appeared in my head." Everyone nodded. The ship's influence was growing stronger with each visit. They were learning things faster than their minds could process. Amy had started writing in a language that didn't exist, filling notebooks with symbols that conveyed meaning through their shapes rather than representing sounds or ideas. "We need to talk about Steve," Karen said quietly. They all looked toward the medical bay where Steve Harrison had been confined for 3 days. After his breakdown in the ship, he'd seemed to recover, but then he'd started claiming he could see through time. He would tell people what they were about to say before they said it. He knew when equipment would malfunction hours in advance. At first they thought he was guessing, but he was right every single time. "He's not crazy," Karen continued. "His brain scans show activity in regions that shouldn't even be active. He's using parts of his brain that humans haven't evolved to use yet. The ship accelerated his consciousness somehow. Jack stood up, his commander instincts kicking in. We need to slow down, take a break from exploring the ship. We can't, Lisa said. Don't you feel it? The pull? The ship wants us to come back. It's not forcing us, but it's calling to us. Every moment we're not there feels wrong. She was right. They all felt it. The ship had become a constant presence in their minds, a whisper that promised understanding if they just pushed a little further. Earth Command had noticed the changes in their reports. The language they used was becoming stranger, filled with concepts that required paragraphs to explain. That afternoon, they returned to the ship. They couldn't stay away. Daniel found a new section, a chamber where gravity flowed in spirals. He could walk on the walls, the ceiling, surfaces that existed at angles to reality. As he explored, he realized he was starting to understand the ship's logic. It wasn't built for beings that lived in 3 dimensions. It was built for creatures that could exist in multiple states simultaneously. I think I know why the other species failed, he called out to the others. They tried to evolve all at once. They thought they had to completely transcend or remain exactly as they were. But what if there's a middle path? Paul had been studying the power systems and made a disturbing discovery. The ship isn't just teaching us, he announced. It's feeding on something from us, not energy exactly, but potential. Every time we learn something new, we change, and that change generates a kind of field the ship absorbs. So we're fuel? Jack asked, alarmed. No, more like catalysts. The ship needs consciousness to function fully. It's been dormant for millions of years, but our presence, our thoughts, are waking it up completely. Amy had spent hours in the library, chamber, absorbing history and knowledge. She'd learned about the architects, the beings who built the ship. They hadn't just evolved past physical form, they'd evolved past individual existence. They'd become a collective consciousness that existed in dimensions humans couldn't perceive. But they remembered being individual beings, she explained. They remembered the struggle, the fear, the doubt. That's why they built these ships. They're looking for others who can make the same journey but maybe find a different path. Lisa discovered she could now interface directly with some of the ship's systems, not through technology, but through thought itself. When she focused on a display, she could feel the information flowing into her mind. But it was dangerous. Too much at once and she would lose herself in the data stream. She learned that Earth wasn't the first planet the ship had visited. It had been to thousands of worlds, waiting at each one for a species to evolve enough to find it. Most never did. The few that did usually destroyed themselves trying to understand it. There's something else, Lisa said, pulling herself away from the interface. The ship has been sending signals. Ever since we entered it, it's been transmitting into deep space. Transmitting what? Jack demanded. Us, our thoughts, our reactions, our potential. It's reporting back to the architects wherever or whatever they are now. Karen had been monitoring all of them, watching for signs of the breakdown that had affected Steve. We're all changing, she reported. Our brain chemistry, our neural patterns, even our DNA is showing minor alterations. The ship is rewriting us on a fundamental level. Can we stop it? Jack asked. I don't think so, and I'm not sure we should. Karen pulled up her data. Look at this. Our IQs have increased by an average of 40 points. We're processing information 10 times faster than normal. We're becoming smarter, more capable, but we're also becoming less human. They found Steve in the medical bay, calm now but different. His eyes seemed to see through them rather than at them. When he spoke, his words carried layers of meaning. You're afraid of letting go, he said. You think humanity is something fixed, unchangeable. But we've always been evolving, from hunters to farmers to builders to thinkers. This is just the next step. But at what cost? Jack asked. If we lose what makes us human, what's the point of evolving? Steve smiled, an expression that seemed to exist in multiple moments simultaneously. What makes us human? Our bodies, our limitations, or our curiosity, our drive to explore and understand? The ship isn't taking those away. It's amplifying them. That night, they discovered they could share thoughts. Not telepathy exactly, but a kind of resonance. When Lisa thought about a mathematical problem, Paul would find the solution appearing in his mind. When Amy recalled historical facts, Daniel would suddenly know them too. They were becoming connected, their consciousness starting to overlap. This is how it starts, Karen observed. Individual minds becoming a collective. This is what happened to the architects. But humanity had something the other species didn't. They had stubbornness. Where others had surrendered to the change or fought against it, humans did what they always did. They adapted. Jack made a decision. "We control the pace," he announced. "We don't let the ship force us to change faster than we can handle. We take what we can use and leave the rest." It sounded simple, but implementing it was harder. The ship's knowledge was seductive. Each piece led to another. Each understanding opened new doors. Lisa found herself spending entire days connected to the ship's systems, her consciousness spreading through its data streams. Paul discovered he could manipulate matter at the quantum level, rearranging atoms with his thoughts. But each time he did it, he felt a piece of his humanity slipping away, replaced by something vast and impersonal. Amy was translating more of the architect's history. They had faced the same choice. They had chosen transcendence and gained the universe but lost themselves. They were everywhere and nowhere, eternal and momentary, gods and ghosts. "They regret it," she said one day. "Not the evolution, but the speed. They changed too fast, didn't preserve enough of what they were. That's why they built these ships. They're hoping someone else will find a better way." Daniel had been exploring deeper parts of the ship and found something disturbing. A room filled with preserved remains of other species. Not bodies exactly, but echoes. Imprints of consciousness from those who had tried and failed. "They're still aware," he said, his face pale. "Trapped between states, neither transcended nor mortal. The ship keeps them as warnings or memorials." I could hear them thinking, feeling, regretting. The discovery shook them all. The path the ship offered led to godhood or oblivion, with a terrible middle ground for those who couldn't commit to either. But they also realized something important. They were still choosing. The ship wasn't forcing them. It was offering, teaching, enabling, but not compelling. "We need to make a decision," Jack said. "Do we continue knowing the risks? Do we stop now and leave with what we've learned? Or do we try something no other species has? Do we find a human way to use this gift?" They sat in the ship's central chamber, surrounded by impossible architecture and displays showing the birth and death of galaxies. 7 humans on the moon, faced with the future of their entire species. The ship hummed around them, patient as always, waiting to see what these strange, stubborn, contradictory beings would choose. It had seen species choose transcendence and lose themselves. It had seen others reject the gift and stagnate. But humans were already proving different. They were changing but fighting to remain themselves. They were evolving, but refusing to abandon their nature. Perhaps the ship's ancient systems calculated these were the ones the architects had been waiting for. Jack Sullivan looked at the impossible equation Paul had written on the wall of their habitat. It described how the ship's engines worked, except the math required accepting that 2 + 2 could equal 5, 4, and -7 simultaneously. Any normal human would dismiss it as nonsense, but Jack could see how it worked. "This is insane," Jack said. "Yes," Paul agreed cheerfully. "Completely insane, and also completely correct. That's when I realized what we've been doing wrong." The rest of the team gathered around. After weeks of exposure to the ship, they'd all changed. Lisa could perceive 11 dimensions. Amy spoke 3 languages that had never existed on Earth. Daniel could walk through walls sometimes, though he couldn't control when, but they were still human, still themselves because they'd done something no other species had tried. They'd stopped trying to make sense of it. Every other species, Paul continued, tried to understand the ship completely. They needed their reality to be consistent, logical, coherent. When they encountered paradox, they either rejected it or let it destroy their minds. But humans, we have a gift. We can believe impossible things, Karen nodded. Think about human history. We believed the Earth was flat while sailing around it. We practiced medicine based on humors while accidentally discovering antibiotics. We've always been comfortable with contradiction. So you're saying we succeed because we're too stupid to know better? Jack asked. Not stupid, Amy corrected. Flexible. We compartmentalize. We can hold contradictory ideas without reconciling them. The ship operates on paradox, and we're the only species that can work with paradox without resolving it. They developed what Paul called useful lies, models of the ship's technology that were completely wrong but functionally accurate. Like ancient sailors navigating by stars they thought were gods. They could use the ship's systems without truly understanding them. Lisa had created a manual for interfacing with the ship's computers. It included instructions like think purple mathematics and feel the equation's weight. It made no logical sense, but it worked every time. They were writing poetry to describe engineering and using music to navigate. I've been experimenting, Daniel announced. He held up a device he'd built using Earth technology and fragments of understanding from the ship. This shouldn't work. It violates conservation of energy, the speed of light limit, and basic causality. But it does work because I built it while believing it both would and wouldn't function. The device flickered between existing and not existing, but while it existed, it could transmit messages instantly across any distance. Earth Command had been receiving their reports before they sent them, which had caused significant confusion until they explained they were using impossible technology. Steve, who had recovered from his initial breakdown, had become their explorer of consciousness. He could now move his awareness through time, not his body, just his perception. He'd watched the ship being built millions of years ago and seen possible futures where humanity joined the architects. They're all waiting, he reported. Not just the architects, but all the species that transcended. They exist in a realm beyond, physical space, and they're lonely. They want others to join them, but they want us to do it our way, not theirs. The ship had revealed more of itself as they'd proven capable of handling paradox. They found rooms that existed in the past, workshops where thinking about a tool caused it to exist, libraries where books wrote themselves based on the reader's needs. Each discovery should have driven them mad, but they treated impossibilities, like everyday inconveniences. Oh, that door only opens on Wednesdays that haven't happened yet, Lisa would say casually. Just think about next week while walking backward. They'd started teaching Earth scientists their methods, though the lessons were strange. Don't try to understand, just accept. If it seems impossible, it probably works. Logic is a tool, not a rule. The physicists were having breakdowns, but the engineers were making progress. Jack had been communicating with Earth Command, trying to explain their situation. We're not becoming aliens, he insisted during one transmission. We're becoming more human. Humans have always been the species that does things before we're ready. We used fire before understanding chemistry. We flew before understanding aerodynamics. Now we're using impossible technology before understanding impossibility. The ship responded to their approach by opening new areas. They found manufacturing bays where thought became matter, medical centers that healed by adjusting probability, and navigation systems that moved by convincing the universe the ship had always been at the destination. But the most important discovery came from Amy's translation work. She'd found records of the architect's final message before transcendence, and it changed everything. They didn't want to lose their individuality, she explained. But they thought they had to, thought it was the price of evolution. They were wrong. They chose transcendence because they couldn't imagine another option. But they built these ships hoping someone would find that other option. What other option? Jack asked. Partnership, not transcendence, not stagnation, but collaboration. The ship isn't just a test or a gift, it's an invitation to work together. The architects want us to join them, not by becoming them, but by bridging the gap between physical and transcendent existence. Paul had been working on this exact problem. The ship can exist in both states simultaneously. It's physical and transcendent, impossible and real. What if we could do the same? Not evolve past humanity, but expand it. They decided to test the theory. Using their useful lies and impossible tools, they built a communication array that shouldn't exist. It worked by being in 17 dimensions while only occupying 3, transmitting through spaces that weren't there. When they activated it, the response was immediate. Not words or images, but pure concept, pure understanding. The architects were there, along with hundreds of other transcended species. They were vast, infinite, but also desperately limited. They could see everything, but touch nothing. They existed everywhere, but experienced nowhere. We made a mistake, the message conveyed. We thought transcendence meant leaving everything behind, but existence without experience is not existence at all. We need you to be what we cannot be anymore. Physical, limited, real. What are you asking? Jack transmitted back, though he thought the answer rather than spoke it. Build bridges. Create connections. Be the hands we no longer have and the voices we can no longer use. We will share our knowledge, our perspective, our power. You will share your reality, your experience, your humanity. Together, we can be more than either alone. The team looked at each other. This wasn't what any of them had expected. The ship wasn't a test to see if humanity could transcend. It was an interview to see if they could remain human while working with gods. We need more people, Lisa said. Engineers who can build impossible things, scientists who can study paradoxes, artists who can imagine contradictions. This is too big for just us. Jack made the decision that would change humanity forever. We accept, he told the architects, but on our terms. We remain human. We keep our individuality, our mortality, our limitations. We'll work with you, learn from you, help you, but we won't become you. The ship pulsed with something that felt like joy. New sections opened, revealing not tests, but tools. Training systems to help humans learn to use impossible technology safely. Medical bays that could enhance human capability without erasing human nature. Libraries that taught through story rather than forced understanding. They're giving us the keys, Paul breathed. Not to transcendence, but to partnership. We can have the power of gods while remaining mortal. We can travel between stars while still calling Earth home. Over the next days, they established protocols. Humans would crew the ships, explore the physical universe, make discoveries that required senses and experience. The transcended beings would provide knowledge, power, perspective from beyond dimensional limits. Together, they would explore realms neither could reach alone. Steve, who could now consciously choose when to perceive different timelines, saw the futures spreading out from this moment. We don't lose, he said with wonder. In every timeline where we stay true to our nature, where we embrace paradox without surrendering to it, humanity thrives. We become the bridge between the physical and the infinite. The ship began to transform, adapting itself to human use while retaining its impossible nature. Controls appeared that hands could use, even if the mechanisms they controlled existed, in 17 dimensions. Displays showed information in ways human brains could process, even when that information described indescribable things. You know what's funny? Daniel said, laughing as he walked through a wall by accident again. Every other species failed because they tried too hard. We're succeeding because we're too stubborn to fail properly. Jack grinned. That's humanity for you. We don't transcend. We don't surrender. We just keep stumbling forward until the universe gives up and lets us win. The moon base had become the first embassy between the physical and transcendent realms. Soon, more humans would come, carefully selected for their ability to accept impossibility without losing themselves. They would learn to use tools that couldn't exist, solve problems that had no solutions, and build bridges across paradoxes. 6 months had passed since humanity's first contact with the ship. The moon base had expanded into a city, with scientists, engineers, and artists from every nation working alongside each other. They called it Paradox City, and it was the strangest place in human history. Buildings existed in multiple locations at once. The cafeteria served meals that were simultaneously breakfast and dinner. The research labs studied phenomena that both did and didn't exist. And everyone who lived there had learned to accept impossible things before their morning coffee, which sometimes arrived before they ordered it. Lisa Morrison stood in the ship's navigation center, her hands dancing across controls that existed in dimensions her eyes couldn't see. She'd become humanity's first impossible navigator, plotting courses through spaces that weren't there to destinations that existed sideways from reality. "Ready for the first test flight?" Paul asked. He'd spent months preparing the ship for human use, installing safety systems that worked on the principle of protective paradox. If something went wrong, the ship would retroactively prevent it from having gone wrong in the first place. "Ready as anyone can be for traveling through impossible space," Lisa replied. "The architects are waiting for us at the coordinates that don't exist. Should be fun." The crew had expanded. 20 humans now worked aboard the ship, each chosen for their ability to function with contradiction. There was Ben Cooper, a physicist who'd thrown out his textbooks and now solved problems through interpretive dance. Maria Santos, an engineer who built machines by sculpting them from probability. Tommy Chen, barely 25, who could program computers that calculated results before receiving input. They were humanity's first impossible astronauts, and they were about to do something no human had done before. They were going to visit the realm where transcended beings lived, deliver a package that existed only conceptually, and return home for dinner. "Earth Command, this is Paradox 1, Jack announced. He'd remained mission commander, though the mission had become something nobody could have imagined. "We are prepared for our first transit through impossible space. If we don't return, we never left, so don't worry about us." Earth Command's response came from General Rita Simmons, who'd learned to give orders that contradicted themselves. "Paradox 1, you are cleared for departure and have already returned successfully. Good luck with what already happened." Paul activated the engines. The ship didn't move because it was already at its destination. It hadn't left because it had never arrived. It traveled by convincing the universe that it had always been where it was going. The journey took forever, and no time at all. Lisa watched reality fold around them. Stars became musical notes. Gravity turned into color. Time flowed backward and forward simultaneously. Her upgraded human consciousness could process it all, filing impossible experiences into mental compartments that didn't interfere with each other. "Look at that," Daniel breathed. He pointed at something that couldn't be pointed at, a structure that existed in concepts rather than space. It was where the architects lived, if living was the right word for existence without form. The realm of transcended beings was nothing like they'd expected. It wasn't empty or abstract. It was full of activity, consciousness, pure thought, given, shaped by will alone. Billions of entities existed here, each one a former physical being who'd evolved beyond matter. "Welcome," came a communication that wasn't words or thoughts but pure meaning. "You are the first to visit while remaining anchored in physical reality. You are the bridge we've waited eons to find." Amy had prepared for this moment. She'd brought something the transcended beings couldn't create themselves. Physical art. A sculpture that existed in 3 dimensions, that could be touched, that had weight and texture. To beings of pure thought, it was more valuable than all the knowledge in the universe. "We brought you something real," she said, offering the sculpture. "Something that exists in only one state, that can't be everything at once, that has limitations." The response was overwhelming. Joy, gratitude, wonder, from beings that had forgotten what it was like to experience singular, limited, beautiful things. They shared their own gifts in return. Technologies that impossible, wisdom from millions of years of existence, star maps to worlds humans couldn't have imagined. But more importantly, they shared their stories. Each transcended species had its own path to this realm. The architects had built. The singers had composed their way beyond reality. The dreamers had imagined themselves into pure thought. And now humanity was writing its own story. The species that refused to choose between transcendence and limitation. "We want to establish regular contact," Jack proposed. "Trade, exchange, collaboration. You have knowledge we need. We have experiences you've lost. Together we can explore both sides of existence. The agreement formed itself into something humans could understand. A treaty written in mathematics and poetry, signed with paradox and sealed with impossibility. Humanity would serve as agents in the physical universe for transcended beings. In return, the transcended would share their knowledge and power, carefully filtered through human consciousness to remain usable. The return journey was smoother. The ship had learned to translate impossible travel into something human minds could process more easily. It felt like riding a roller coaster designed by someone who didn't believe in up or down. When they arrived back at the moon, they found changes. The technology they'd been sharing had transformed human society. Clean energy that generated power from paradox. Medical treatments that healed by adjusting probability. Transportation that worked by being in two places at once. But humanity itself remained unchanged at its core. People still fell in love, still argued about sports, still complained about traffic even when cars could exist in multiple locations simultaneously. They'd gained the tools of gods while keeping the hearts of humans. Steve Harrison had established a school for impossible thinking. Students learned to accept contradictions, work with paradoxes, and build technologies that shouldn't exist. The graduation exam was simple. Create something impossible that worked anyway. The key, he taught his students, is not to resolve the paradox. Don't try to make it make sense. Just accept that it doesn't make sense and use it anyway. That's the human advantage. We're the only species stubborn enough to use tools we don't understand. Karen Webb had been studying the psychological effects of prolonged exposure to impossibility. Her findings were encouraging. Humans who learned to accept paradox showed increased creativity, better problem-solving skills, and improved mental flexibility. They were evolving not beyond humanity but into a fuller version of it. The ship had become a symbol of humanity's new role in the universe. More ships were being discovered, buried on Mars, hidden in Jupiter's moons, waiting in the asteroid belt. Each one was similar but different, adapted for the species that would find it. But humans were the first to use them as intended, not as tests to pass or technologies to master, but as tools for connection. Lisa stood on the observation deck of Paradox City, looking up at Earth hanging in the black sky. In her enhanced perception, she could see probability streams showing possible futures. In most of them, humanity thrived. They colonized impossible worlds, built bridges to transcendent realms, and explored corners of the universe that didn't technically exist. But in all those futures, they remained human. They kept their art, their music, their stories. They loved and lost, hoped and feared, dreamed and woke. They were the species that looked at impossibility and said, "We can work with that." Paul joined her, holding 2 cups of coffee that had been brewed tomorrow and would be drunk yesterday. "Any regrets?" he asked, "about becoming impossible?" "Never," Lisa said. "We're still us, just us with better tools and weirder problems." The communication array chimed with an incoming message from the architects. They'd found something in the deep void between galaxies, something that required physical investigation. They needed humanity's help. Jack assembled the crew. Ready for another impossible mission? The team looked at each other and grinned. They were astronauts who traveled without moving, scientists who studied things that didn't exist, humans who'd learned to be impossible while remaining possible. "Let's do the impossible," Jack said. Again. The ship powered up with energies that violated physics. Reality bent around them in ways that shouldn't work. And humanity, stubborn and strange as always, headed into the impossible future they'd claimed for themselves. They were no longer alone in the universe. They had partners, allies, friends in realms beyond imagination. The transcended beings had knowledge and power, but humanity had something equally valuable: the ability to exist in contradiction, to thrive in paradox, to look at the impossible and make it work anyway. The moon fell away behind them as they headed into spaces that weren't there, carrying real objects to beings that weren't real, building bridges that couldn't exist. It was impossible, it was absurd. It was humanity's destiny, and in the vast web of consciousness that connected transcended beings across the universe, there was something that might have been laughter. The youngest species had become the most important, not by transcending their nature but by embracing it. The universe had waited a